I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you this story. Not the ending. Not the part where I stood in my own driveway at 2 in the morning watching strangers walk in and out of my house in blue gloves. Not even the part where the detective looked at me the way you look at someone you're not sure you can trust yet. No, what I want to be clear about is the morning it really started, 6 weeks before all of it. A Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was watching the news when my wife came and sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and said she needed me to go stay with our son for a while. She didn't say why, I asked. She said she just needed space to think. That was the whole sentence. Space to think. I had been married to this woman for 38 years. 38 years of sharing a bathroom, sharing a bed, raising 2 kids in that house, burying her mother and then mine, sitting together in the dark on the back porch during the years when money was tight and neither of us wanted to say it out loud. 38 years and she needed space to think. I didn't fight her on it. That's the thing people don't understand about me. I am not a man who raises his voice, never have been. My father was a shouter and I spent my whole childhood promising myself I would be different. So I sat there with my coffee going cold, nodded slowly, and said, "Okay, I'll call our son." She said thank you, like I had just agreed to pick up dry cleaning. Our son lived about 40 minutes away with his wife and their 2 boys. He's in his late 30s now, working in construction management. When I called and told him I needed to stay for a bit, he didn't push either. He just said, "Come on, Dad." His wife made up the guest room, and nobody asked me too many questions that first night, which I appreciated. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself my wife and I had been through rough patches before. She had gone through a difficult period in her mid-50s, something she called a kind of grieving without knowing what she was grieving, and we had come out the other side. I told myself this was probably something like that. I kept myself busy during those weeks. I helped our son on a weekend project at his house, refinishing the back deck. I took my grandsons to the park. I called my wife every other day, short calls, careful conversations, both of us speaking the way you speak when you're walking across ice and testing every step before you put your weight down. She said she was fine. She said she was thinking. She said she appreciated my patience. I did not feel patient. I felt like a man who had been asked to leave his own life and had no idea what he had done wrong. The 6th week, on a Friday evening, I asked her if I could come home for dinner. She hesitated. Then she said maybe not this weekend. She said she had things she needed to work through. I said okay. I hung up and sat on the edge of the guest bed in my son's house and stared at the wall for about 10 minutes. That night I went to bed early. I was 63 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the work on the deck. The call came at 1:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone when it woke me up and the number was my neighbor from 2 doors down, a man I had known for over 20 years. We had been at each other's backyard barbecues, helped each other move furniture, waved from driveways for 2 decades. He was not a man who called in the middle of the night. I answered immediately. His voice was wrong. Not scared exactly. More like someone who has just seen something they cannot put back unseen. He said my name. Then he said, "There are police at your house. A lot of them. I saw the lights from my bedroom and looked out, and they've been there for almost an hour. I didn't know if you knew." I said I didn't know. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know anything else. He just thought I should know. I sat on the edge of that bed in my son's guest room, and I felt something happen in my chest. Not pain. More like the floor dropping out from under something. I got dressed in the dark without turning on the light. I don't know why. It just felt wrong to turn on the light. My son must have heard me because he was in the hallway when I came out. He looked at my face and didn't ask. He just said, "I'll drive." We didn't talk much on the way. The highway was empty at that hour. The kind of empty that makes the world feel like it belongs to some other version of itself. Our son kept both hands on the wheel, and I looked out the window and tried to imagine what could possibly be happening at my house and could not land on a single scenario that made sense. When we turned onto my street, I saw the lights from 2 blocks away. Blue and red moving against the houses, against the trees, against everything. There were 3 police cars, and what I later learned was a detective's unmarked vehicle. There was yellow tape across my front door. Crime scene tape. I got out of the car before our son had fully stopped. I walked toward the house, and an officer stepped in front of me immediately, hand up, asking me to stop. I said, "This is my house. I am the homeowner." He asked me for identification. I gave it to him. He looked at it and then looked at me for a moment longer than felt comfortable before he said, "Wait here," and walked back toward the door. Another officer came out to stand near me, not aggressive, but present in a way that made it clear I wasn't supposed to move. Our son had parked and was walking toward me, and I put my hand up to stop him. I don't know why. I just didn't want him closer to whatever this was. The detective came out a few minutes later. He was a calm man. The kind of calm that comes from years of practice at delivering information without his face giving away what he already knows. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and asked if I knew where my wife was. I said she was inside. She lived here. He said, "Yes." He said she was currently at the hospital. Something in my stomach dropped through the floor. I said, "Is she hurt?" He said she was being treated. He said she was going to be okay. Then he paused the way people pause when the next sentence is the one that changes things. He said there had been an incident involving another individual. That individual had been transported to the hospital as well. He said the situation was still being assessed. I asked him what happened. He looked at me carefully and said, "We're going to need to talk." He gestured toward one of the police cars and asked if I would be comfortable sitting there for a few minutes. He said it was just easier than standing on the street. I sat in the back of a police car in my own driveway at 2 in the morning and answered questions for 40 minutes. What was my relationship with my wife? When had I last been home? Had I been aware of any conflicts my wife was having with other people? Did I know a man named Douglas? Did I know how my wife knew Douglas? Douglas. I did not know anyone named Douglas. I said so several times. The detective watched my face while I said it the way you watch someone's face when you're trying to figure out if they already know the answer to your question. I did not know the answer, and I think eventually he believed that. What I learned that night, and more in the days and weeks that followed, was this. My wife had known Douglas for 4 years. She had met him at a grief support group she had started attending after her close friend from work passed away. I had known she went to that group. I had been glad she found it useful. I had never met Douglas. I had never heard his name. What I had not known was that, for at least the last 2.5 years, Douglas and my wife had been involved. Not in a way I had suspected, not in a way I had been warned about, not in any way I had even considered as a possibility. When I think back to those years now, I can find things. Not obvious things. Small things. The occasional evening she came home later than expected and seemed quieter than usual. The way she would sometimes look out the window during dinner at nothing I could see. The weekend trip she took alone to visit an old college friend that I never questioned because she had done that before and I had never had reason to question it. I was 63 years old and I thought my marriage was one of the better ones I had seen up close in my life. I thought we had real communication. I thought we understood each other. I had no idea. What happened that night, as I pieced it together over the following weeks, was that my wife had ended things with Douglas. I don't know exactly when. I don't know exactly why. Whether guilt finally outweighed everything else, whether the relationship had become something she couldn't manage, whether she had looked at her life clearly for the first time in years and decided to come back to it. I don't know. She has told me some of it. Not all of it. Maybe not ever all of it. What I do know is that Douglas did not take it well. The asking me to leave, the space to think, the careful phone calls where she said she was fine, that was not about us. That was about him. She was afraid of him. She had been trying to end it, and he had been escalating. And she had asked me to leave because she did not want me in the middle of something she had brought into our lives. That night, he came to the house. He had been calling her, showing up places, sending messages that had grown from angry to frightening over a period of weeks. That night, he came to our home. He came to the front door and she let him in, or he pushed his way in, Accounts differ, and I have stopped trying to know exactly, and there was a confrontation in our living room. The same living room where I had read books in the evenings for 30 years. The same living room where our kids had grown up. He had a gun. In the end, it was his gun that was used. How exactly it changed hands? What words were said before it did? What she was thinking in that moment? I can tell you what she told the police and what the police told me, but I cannot tell you the truth of it because I was not there. What I can tell you is that Douglas was shot once, in the shoulder. He was alive when the ambulance came. He was alive when they operated. He is, to my knowledge, still alive. My wife was arrested. I drove to the hospital that night to see her. She was in a room by herself, a small abrasion on her forearm from where she had apparently fallen during the struggle, nothing that required much treatment. She was sitting up in the hospital bed when I came in, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before in 38 years. It was not guilt. It was not defiance. It was not the expression of someone caught in a lie. It was the expression of someone who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and has just finally let it fall. She said my name. She said she was sorry. I sat in the chair beside the bed, and I did not say anything for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that hospital room, because I think the easy story, the clean story, is that I was purely a victim, that I had done nothing and had everything taken from me, and there is truth in that. There is real truth in that. But sitting in that chair, I also thought about all the evenings I had not asked, all the times I had accepted the quiet explanation, all the years I had been so careful not to be my father, not to push, not to raise my voice, that I had perhaps not asked the questions a husband should ask. I am not saying what she did was my fault. It was not. But I am also not willing to tell you I was simply innocent and blind, with no participation in the distance that had grown between us. Marriage is not a thing that fails in one day. It is a thing that changes slowly, in increments so small you don't notice each one, until one morning you are sitting across a kitchen table from the person you chose and they are telling you they need space and you realize you do not actually know what they mean by that. She was charged with aggravated assault. Her attorney was able to establish self-defense as the core of her argument. Douglas had brought the weapon. There were text messages that showed the pattern of his escalating contact. There were phone records. Her attorney made the case that she had been in fear for her life and had acted accordingly. The trial took almost a year to go through. Our daughter flew in from out of state. She stayed with us, stayed with me, in the house, which I had gone back to once it was released by the police and the yellow tape came down. She is in her mid-30s and she is a practical, clear-eyed person. She came and helped me because that is who she is. She said she didn't want to have opinions about her mother until she understood more. She said she just wanted to be useful. I was grateful for that. Our son was angrier. He didn't hide it. He would call me and talk about his mother, and his voice would get tight in a way that reminded me of being a boy. I let him be angry. It was not my job to take that away from him. My wife was convicted, not on the most serious charge. The self-defense argument reduced it significantly. She was sentenced to 7 years, with the possibility of parole after 4. I went to the sentencing. I sat in the gallery. When they took her out, she turned and looked at me, and I held her gaze because I felt like the least I could do was not look away. I am going to tell you something now that some people will not understand. Some people will be angry at me for it. Some people will say I am weak or foolish, or that I don't respect myself. I have heard versions of all of that. I did not divorce her. I am not saying this was easy. I am not saying it was without cost. I spent months seeing a therapist, a man about my own age who had a quiet office and a lot of patience, and I spent those months pulling apart the last few years of my life, looking for things I had missed, and trying to understand how I wanted to live whatever years I had left. I wrote her letters in prison. She wrote me back. The letters were different from our marriage had been, and I mean that in a complicated way. In our marriage, we had talked constantly and said very little. The letters were the opposite. slow and careful and full of things we had never put into words. She told me about what the grief support group had been like after her friend died. She told me how lost she had felt, how invisible, how she had not known how to tell me. She told me that she was not excusing anything. She said she was trying to explain, and that she understood the difference. I told her about the night in the hospital room. I told her about sitting in that chair and trying to figure out whether I was a good husband. I told her I didn't think I was as good at paying attention as I had believed. We are not the same as we were. We will never be the same. That version of our marriage, with its careful quiet and its unasked questions, that version is gone. I don't mourn it. I think in some ways that version was already a problem I just hadn't named yet. In the second year of her sentence, she came up for an early parole review. There had been a nonviolent offender review process in the state, and she was considered. I submitted a letter. I told the board what I knew about what happened that night and what I believed about who she was as a person and what I believed she was capable of going forward. It was the most difficult letter I have ever written. She was not granted parole at that review. She was granted it 14 months later, after completing a program inside and after 2 more reviews. She served 3 years and 8 months of her 7-year sentence. I was in the parking lot when she walked out. It was a gray morning, one of those February mornings that can't decide if it wants to be cold or just tired. She came through the doors and she stopped when she saw me, and for a moment, neither of us moved. She looked older. I probably did too. I want to tell you we had a beautiful moment. Maybe we did. It was also just 2 old people standing in a parking lot not sure what to do with their hands. I said, "You hungry?" She said yes. We got in the car and drove to a diner about 10 miles away. The same diner we had gone to when we first moved to that part of the state, decades ago, back when the kids were small and we thought we knew what our life was going to look like. We sat in a booth and ordered eggs and coffee and didn't try to say too much at once. Our daughter came to visit the following weekend. She and her mother sat on the back porch for almost 3 hours. I didn't go out there. That was their time, and I understood that. I heard them laughing once, somewhere in the middle of it. I was in the kitchen, doing nothing in particular, and I heard that sound and stood still for a moment. Our son took longer. He came about 2 months after she was home. He brought his boys, our grandsons, and they ran around the backyard with no idea about any of the weight the adults were carrying. Our son and his mother walked together down to the end of the yard while the boys played, and I watched from the porch. I don't know what they said. He hasn't told me, and I haven't asked. What I know is that he came back the following month and the month after that. It is not a clean ending. I want to be honest about that. There are days when I wake up and something in the light or the quiet reminds me of that night in my son's guest room and the phone ringing and what it felt like to drive toward those lights on my street. There are days when I look at my wife across the kitchen and I think about things I cannot fully put down yet. She knows. She doesn't ask me to pretend otherwise. We see the therapist together now. We go every other week. We talk the way those letters taught us to talk, slow and careful, and with the understanding that explaining and excusing are different things. I am 66 years old. I have grandchildren who call me on video and show me their drawings and tell me about their days at school. I have a son who came back. I have a daughter who never left. I have a back porch where I drink my coffee in the mornings and watch the yard come awake. I said at the beginning that I wanted to be clear about one thing. The morning at the kitchen table. The space to think. What I have come to believe is that we are all, at different points in our lives, 2 different people living in the same body. The person we are to the world and the person we are in the silence of what we haven't said. My wife was that for a long time. I was too, in a different way. The difference between a marriage that survives something and one that doesn't is not whether both people are perfect. No one is perfect. The difference is whether both people are willing, when everything is stripped down and there is nothing left to hide behind, to keep looking at each other. I am still looking. So is she. That has to be enough. And most mornings it is.